Hello and welcome to the F1 Report. In his 200th F1 race, Mercedes' Lewis Hamilton secured victory in the Belgian Grand Prix, holding off the challenge of Ferrari's Sebastian Vettel to cut his championship deficit to just 7 points. The Brit continued his great start to the second half of the season, having claimed his 68th career pole position on the Saturday to equal the record of Michael Schumacher. Joining me to mull over the Belgian Grand Prix is Sky F1's Marc Priestley, and returning to the show, the ever-popular NBC's Will Buxton. Great to have you back, Will.
Hello, it's good to be back.
I mean, what could have been a bit of a lacklustre race actually turned into anything but. So many talking points. Let's go back to quali for a moment. You interviewed the drivers on the grid straight after it. What kind of mood did you find them to be in?
The top two, buoyant. I think, delighted to be back from the summer break to pick up this, this championship fight, which we've known has been, we've teed it up as a decade in the making between these two guys. So, yeah, really buoyant. Lewis, obviously, with the equaling Michael's record, there was some emotion there for him. But I think, yeah, most of all, just optimism, positivity, and for Seb as well. Yes, he got a little toe from Kimi, but it was a hell of a lap from him to get it up onto the front row of the grid. Yeah. So both those guys just, keying up for the race. Which
was why Valtteri was anything but buoyant, because he didn't expect that, did he?
No, I think that's right. I think that was perhaps one of the biggest surprises of the weekend was the pace of Ferrari, particularly on race day. I don't think Mercedes expected that. I don't think we really necessarily expected it. And I think not only did it sort of give us a bit of a shock in Belgium, but perhaps moving forward for the rest of the season, it's brought this, who's going to come out on top of this? Yeah. It's so close.
The development race certainly seems to have swung in Ferrari's favour to an extent. Something else we didn't expect was a clean start, but we got it, didn't we?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Again, more of that later. We've got some major talking points to get through. Before we do, here's a quick recap of the whole race.
We are here at Spa for a 50th Formula One World Championship Grand Prix. It's lights out, away we go. Vettel, I think, got the better start there. The two Force India starting well too, but Lewis Hamilton into turn one in the lead. On the inside, Valtteri Bottas is being challenged by Kimi Räikkönen. Down the inside goes Max Verstappen, as well as Daniel Ricciardo to protect his place. And as they head now down towards Eau Rouge. Oh. And there is Nico Hülkenberg having a real go on Fernando Alonso into the bus stop chicane. Honda engine against the Renault engine, pulls out to the left-hand side, and Force India will come on the inside as well. Looks power. And that is not the way you wanted to repay the faithful today. Lewis Hamilton gets past Kimi Räikkönen. Lewis Hamilton puts himself back into the lead, right on board with Ocon towards Eau Rouge, and once again they have touched. Honestly, what the safety car has been deployed. Watch the pit lane now. Sebastian Vettel will now commence the chase, going down through Eau Rouge. The championship leader is alongside Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton fights back. Hamilton protects the lead. Hamilton, 200 Grand Prix, and he wins in Spa on this Sunday afternoon.
We'll come to the amazing driver feud that's developing between Esteban Ocon and Sergio Perez in just a moment. There was a lot of post-race interest in how Hamilton managed to keep Vettel at bay after the restart. That was the kind of key point, wasn't it, Will, that restart?
It was, and I think it came out of a mistake on Hamilton's part, as he told, I think, both of us in the pen afterwards. I was in the wrong engine mode at the restart. And actually, it was the best thing that could have possibly happened, because he was limited on the run down into Eau Rouge. And then coming up through Radion, it meant that Seb had to lift a little bit, couldn't get on him down the Camel straight, and Lewis thought, okay, and then admitted every lap after that, I just, 90% throttle down to Eau Rouge, meant that Seb had to back off and then could never get within DRS range, and that was absolutely pivotal. As we know with these cars, there's so much disruption, there's so much horrible airflow off the back of them, that if you can keep somebody just in that kind of 1.1, 1.2 seconds behind, they're never going to get close to you, even with the tyre advantage that Seb had.
Did you have Baku in your mind at any point, Marc?
Well, it did get close, didn't it? But I think you're right. I thought it was quite clever of Lewis to think that, even though it came out of that mistake, it was good thinking. And I think, this weekend highlighted exactly what you're saying, that current Formula One cars can't follow each other closely enough on circuits, particularly like this, because we had lots of battles where cars were 2 seconds apart and just couldn't, even though they had a faster car, couldn't get past. Daniel Ricciardo in third with Kimi and Bottas behind. There was no way Kimi was ever going to get past him, even though his car was considerably quicker. So that was a shame. I thought the safety car coming at the point that it did actually robbed us of what could have been a slightly more spicy ending between the two front runners, because they could have been on different strategies. perhaps converging at the end of the race, but their safety car put them both onto the same strategy, given they were on different tyres, but the same pit stop window. But even so, it showed how close it was and is now moving forward, so I think we've got lots to look forward to.
Well, the safety car was a pivotal moment for Daniel Ricciardo as well, clearly. I mean, excellent sort of opportunism, if you like, from him, but just a brilliant restart.
Yeah, I mean, was it brilliant from Kimi and Daniel, or was it a flustered mistake from Valtteri, who, you know, like Lewis, was on the hardest tyre out there, a tyre that's difficult to get the heat into as well, and just he on the restart just couldn't hold those guys, you know, behind him, whereas Seb, also I should say Lewis, did a good job of keeping Seb behind. Valtteri just couldn't keep those guys with the softest.
Was that a moment then that you felt that Valtteri's out of this title race?
I think he's going to look back on this one and say, you know, that was a weekend where I should have brought my A game. All the way through practice and qualifying, he was locking his right front. He got on top of that in the race, but, you know, again, it's the third or fourth time we've seen this season Valtteri just not quite able to keep race pace with Lewis. And Toto said earlier in the weekend, you know, Ferrari have clearly put all their eggs in the Vettel basket. We may have to consider doing the same with Lewis, and I fear after Spa they will have to do that now.
And you know, by contrast, Lewis's mood from the first moment of free practice just seems so different. He was refreshed after his holiday. He was on it, wasn't he?
Well, he was, and I think you know, Lewis rises when the big moments come along. You know, we've seen that right through his career, and it was 200th race, wasn't it, this weekend? I think he was on for taking Schumacher or equaling Schumacher's pole record. I don't think it was ever in doubt that he was going to do that, because he loves those moments, and when the pressure's on, he tends to rise to the top, and I think that's exactly what he did.
And he has really stated his claim that it's so important for him to get the win here and in Italy, and then everything sort of comes alive, doesn't it? Okay, so we know that Daniel Ricciardo had a great race, but my goodness, it couldn't be a more different story on the other side of the garage. Max Verstappen, I mean, how much bad luck can one guy have? And actually, as he said to me in the pen afterwards, you know what, it's not bad luck anymore. We've just got major problems with reliability.
But where does he go? What does he do?
Well,
you know,
doesn't have any options, does he?
The amazing thing is you look at the career ascent of this guy, and it's stagnated. You know, we thought he would be 5, 6, 7 wins into his Formula One career by now, fighting for a world championship, and he's gone up, 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 and then it's just plateaued. And that's got to frustrate him as much as anybody. But, you know, where does he go? We expect Mercedes to confirm Bottas for 2018 in Monza. So that's Mercedes.
Could you ever
Ferrari
put Max into a Mercedes alongside Lewis?
I mean, sooner than a Ferrari. I think that's what they'd be pushing for. But I think he knows he's stuck at Red Bull. I say stuck at Red Bull, you know, 4-time world champion team. But Renault have got to get on top of this, and you could sense in the team bosses press conference down in the pen on Friday, I had Horner and the Beatbull next to each other. And I was asking Christian if he was disappointed in his engine supply. And I said, I think you should talk to Cyril. And I said, well, I have. And he says that he's only bringing software updates for the rest of the season. And Christian was like, well, you know, it's just not good enough, is it? Everyone else is bringing major hardware updates every single weekend. You know, would Red Bull be willing to take grid drops for a better unit than simple software issues? I think they would as well.
I mean, Christian, I think, said over the course of the weekend that, and quite rightly, I guess, they're paying customers, aren't they? They're paying an awful lot of money for a product that isn't working. Now, in any walk of life, you've got a right to be upset at that point, and this is simply failing far too often. It's unfortunate, and I think it is only unfortunate that it tends to be falling on Max's side of the garage. I can't see that there's necessarily anything in Max's driving style that's going to be, you know, it's gone way beyond just occasional sort of tipping it over the balance. It's incredible bad luck, but it has gone to the point where everyone's starting to think, how much more can he take, how much more can the team take before something has to crack?
Well, and most importantly, his management. You know, Max's management have always been ferocious in pushing
and
that
his
guy.
dad.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You know, that whole management structure
his
of
entourage,
just pushing him to where he needs to be. And if there's nowhere to push him to, you know, what do? How do they force that issue?
Can he take any consolation from the fact that he has out-qualified Daniel 8 times this season? I mean, I know a Saturday doesn't mean anything, but he knows his talent is there. He just hasn't had the opportunity to show it.
I think it keeps his stock high.
Yes.
That's about as much as he can take from it. People are still talking about him as being a great driver, but he'll take absolutely no consolation because all he wants is points.
Yeah, you get no points on Saturday. Doesn't matter. You know, you can take pole position every single Saturday, but if you don't get the 25 points on Sunday, what does it matter?
Doesn't mean anything. Okay, well, there may be some residual tension between the Red Bull pair following their Hungary collision. Force India, though, have real driver hostilities to manage. Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon made contact not once, but twice in the Belgian Grand Prix, with a second collision leading to a safety car deployment. Ocon had some strong words over team radio, and these continued post-race on Twitter when he said that his teammate had twice tried to kill him. I mean, they're loaded words, aren't they? I mean, he must know that it's going to light a fire in the team. He must know the reaction that that's going to get. Yeah. But actually, in the pen afterwards to both of us, he didn't care. He wanted to make his point.
I mean, on one hand, you've got to say, I do think he was the innocent party. You know, I think he was on the end of some pretty disgraceful driving, I have to say, from Sergio Perez, particularly with the second one. A, given it was the second incident, but B, given they were the only two cars on that bit of the track, he knew who was there, and he very deliberately tried to put a squeeze on him. You don't do that to your teammate. You know, there is a long stretch of straight coming up when they get up out of Eau Rouge onto the Kemmel Straight. If they want to battle it out there. You don't force somebody that close to the wall. So
why did he do it? I mean, we know these frustrations have been bubbling away pretty much all season. He's wanted to assert his control over the team. That's not a way to do it, is it?
Ultimately, the responsibility for this lies with Force India management not getting control of their drivers from Canada onwards. This has bubbled over, and I feel sorry for the boys in the garage. I mean, you know what it's like. These guys have now cost each other points, potential race win in Baku, and as we just spoke about, with only one Red Bull scoring points in half the races this season, where could Force India be in relation to that battle for third if the management had just got their guys under control earlier? So I think a large part of that falls down to them, but also we can't forget the fact that Sergio Perez's backing brings a large percentage, you know, double-figure percentages, possibly even as much as half of the budget, who knows.
So he feels he's able to do things like this.
He's in a position now where he's negotiating for his contract to next year, and he could say, well, I'm off to... They nearly lost him to Williams last year, you know. Do they lose him to Williams again this year? Maybe he goes to Renault. He can sit there and say, well, you know, take my side, or I'm off and I'm taking my sponsors with me.
You can't have that same pairing next year, can you?
But the fact is, you've got a guy alongside Perez who's pushing him, and Perez hasn't been in this position and hasn't looked this flustered since GP2. I think when Mortara was his teammate, and that was the last time he was colliding with his teammates so often. It's disappointing from Sergio, because he's complaining that the top teams aren't looking at him, and you think, well, you know what? If you played a bit nicer and actually had a bit more maturity about you in the way that you're dealing with this young upstart as your teammate, yeah, maybe they would.
He's rattled by him, isn't he?
Well, I think you're right. Other teams look at not just your results, but how you're behaving, how you're acting in a certain team. We saw that to a certain extent with Pascal Wehrlein. Yep. You know, when Force India were looking to take one of those two Mercedes back drivers, and Wehrlein missed out partly because of his personality.
But the irony, because if they'd taken Wehrlein, they wouldn't be having the issues that they are now, probably.
No, because I don't think he'd be troubling Sergio as much as Esteban is.
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult for a team to manage their drivers in this situation. And, you know, it's easy to say it, but I think we've seen so many incidents of teams, even big teams, well-established and experienced teams, not being able to do it, because racing drivers are a competitive bunch. They don't listen. They all think a little bit like footballers. Most of them think they're bigger than the team or you know, whoever's paying their wages these days. And I think you get them into a situation, they don't have often the sort of capability to think, hang on, last week they told me not to do this. They're just in the moment and they're competitive.
And is that the case as well with what he's been saying, just the heat of the moment, or are they loaded words? Are they sort of pointed words? Is he wanting to get a result with what he's saying?
That's a young guy
shooting from the hip.
Yeah, and I think the team would have been furious with that, and thus we had the next morning the conciliatory tone from Esteban coming through. I think that's more of a team statement. You know, come on now, let's pull it, because it doesn't help anybody. No. That kind of thing doesn't help their relationship. But I think we've also got into a situation. Yes, team management is one thing, but I think poor stewarding has allowed us to this point as well, particularly in Spa. Maybe not poor stewarding, but certainly there's no consistency from one race to another. If you look at, you know, Max and Daniel came together in Hungary. Max hadn't intended it. It was a silly moment. You know, stop-go penalty for him.
So why didn't they? Why didn't they?
Well, okay. So the reasoning given was that Esteban had a wheel over the safety line on the right-hand side on the run down to Eau Rouge.
This is the second incident, isn't it?
The second incident. The first incident, Sergio took full responsibility for. Said, I was so concerned with Hülkenberg that I hadn't seen him. Put my hands up, my fault. The second one, it was only those two. If you watch the replay, though, Perez clearly makes two moves. He makes one move to force Ocon over to the right-hand side. Ocon holds his foot in, holds to the right-hand side. They know they're going to come down to the wall like that. But then Perez makes a second move, which forces Ocon's right wheel over that safety line, and ultimately it's Perez's continued move that closes that door and forces him into the wall. Now, how the stewards don't see that, I don't understand. And talking to an FIA race steward, not the one who was working Spa, but another one who I won't name, he said the reason for that is that sometimes between teammates, we as stewards prefer to call it a racing incident and let the team sort it out. Well, we've seen that the team can't sort it out, and it hasn't done. Yeah. And unless you come down in an official capacity and put someone at blame,
the only thing that a driver will listen to is a points deduction or a penalty that's going to affect their race.
And the upshot has been that we've been told by the team, Otmar Zafna, on the pit wall as it happened, that he won't let them race anymore.
Yeah, and that's a shame.
That's a real shame for the fans. OK, well, that's all we've got time for in part one. Join us after the break as we reflect on Alonso's potentially confusing retirement from the race, and we delve into the driver transfer market. We'll see you in a bit. Hello and welcome back to the F1 Report. In amongst the battles and duels on Sunday, Fernando Alonso had to retire his McLaren yet again after suffering yet another mechanical problem with his McLaren. Or did he? After the race, when questioned over the cause of the issue, Honda said that there was nothing wrong, despite Alonso's radio message saying engine problem, engine problem. Now, this has now prompted conspiracy theories over Alonso's retirement. I certainly know when I asked him what the problem was, he said it was with the engine. Do you believe him?
Well, there's a big problem with that engine, isn't there?
Yeah.
Well, we know that there is a rather large problem, but was there a problem at that point in time?
No, there wasn't. And it's not the first time this has happened with Fernando. You know, he came on the radio just before retiring asking if there was any rain forecast.
Yes.
I think that was his literally last desperate attempt for any possible result. When he got told there wasn't any, it was literally, I think, a minute later, he was back in the garage having retired the car. So Fernando likes to prove a point. He's very, very vocal, and particularly at the moment, he's been very vocal on putting lots of blame onto Honda, making sure the world knows why he's not challenging for world titles anymore. And I think that was just another example of that.
And I guess proving the point that ultimately he's in control.
Yes, if you wanted to be positive, you could say that Fernando was merely trying to save that power unit and not put too much stress on it so that he doesn't get grid penalties into the future.
Sure, that's what it is.
I'm sure that's what it is. If you were looking at it realistically, he's just trying to apply a little more pressure on everybody and say, well, what is the point in me being out here when I fight my way through at the start of the race ahead of the Force Indias, ahead of the Renaults, and I'm there and I'm fighting with the Red Bulls, but I get onto the straights and it's like I'm in a Formula 2 car. What's the point of me even being here?
I think he's got to be slightly careful, Fernando. You know, this is not a new thing for him. He's been, as I say, he's very vocal, but I think he's got to be slightly careful because he's being so vocal at the moment that there will come a point, if it hasn't come already, where other teams will start looking at him and thinking, didn't he whinge quite a lot? You know, do we want somebody who's this disruptive within our team? Yes, amazing driver.
We know he's quite a divisive character from his time at Ferrari, but you do need someone to be assertive, and McLaren, of course. You do need someone to sort of stand up for themselves, and actually, when I asked him, does McLaren need to find a new engine supplier in order for you to stay at the team? For the first time ever, he said how much he loved the team, which we know, but he also put a time frame on it and said a decision had to be made in the next 2 weeks. So this is all coming to a head, finally.
It is, and that's clear for everybody to see. McLaren know that already without Fernando having to drum that home. I just think that the divisive nature of Fernando at times can outweigh the performance he brings. He won't, you know, I heard from a fairly reliable source that he was on the phone to Sergio Marchionne a couple of months ago, and Marchionne said, look, no way. You know, whether that was something to do with Vettel's contract or whether it was because they don't want him back in that team, but he left Ferrari with not very many friends, and McLaren the same.
And if you are one of the only places left for him to go, should he leave McLaren, a Williams, a Renault, they don't have the budget for him, let's say a Force India, who are outside of the top three, the best team at the moment. Do you want a guy that can be that disruptive while you as a team are trying to build yourselves? If you're Renault and you're trying to bring yourselves back into contention, do you want a guy who can be that disruptive, or do you want a team player?
Okay, would you rather see him at McLaren or Williams?
Ooh, McLaren in Formula One or McLaren in IndyCar? Because fascinatingly, so overnight, stories broken stateside that Andretti, that Fernando ran with at the Indy 500, will be back with Honda engines next year. And there was some debate as to whether they would switch from Honda to Chevy next year. I spoke to Zach Brown about this in Spa and said, if Andretti switched to Chevy, does that create an end to your potential alliance? And Zach said, no, we want to stick with Andretti. Whatever happens, if we go back to Indy, it'll be with Andretti. Did I just say to Andretti, if we go back to Indy, it'll be with Andretti?
Yep.
You get it, right? Anyway, so overnight they've said, yeah, it's going to be Honda again. So Andretti, Honda link up there. McLaren still with Andretti and Honda. But crucially, with the dithering over the engine scenario in IndyCar, Takuma Sato, who won the Indy 500 this year for Andretti Honda, has moved teams, meaning that Andretti has an open seat for next year. So the team that ran Fernando in the Indy 500 has a full-time IndyCar seat open. That now marks a clear route for Fernando to either get out completely or take a sabbatical, go and do Indy for a year, see if McLaren can sort their problems out in Formula One and come back in 2019. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but the possibility now firmly exists.
How appealing would that be to him, and how difficult would it be at this stage of his F1 career to take a sabbatical and then come back?
Personally, I can't see a sabbatical because I do think he's towards the end of his career in F1. However, maybe he's had enough of F1, and maybe that is it. You know, he loved racing in Indy, absolutely loved it. He's made no secret of the fact he wants to go back. I think it could be an option.
We can't have more of the same, we know that.
Well, no, and
can't have another year like this.
He said, whatever I do in 2018, I need to be in a race-winning car where I can fight for wins and I can fight for titles. That's not going to be at McLaren. It won't be at Renault. And regardless of how brilliant Paddy Lowe is and the money that Lawrence Stroll brings, it's not going to be at Williams. So where does that leave a race-winning car? Yeah. The only place is Indy. That's it.
OK, well, Alonso definitely can't move back to Ferrari, even if they wanted him and even if he wanted them, because they've gone and given Kimi and Seb new contracts. I saw your tweet.
Which one?
You think
There's
it was
so many.
Bit of a lack. There are. You weren't overly impressed with the re-signing of Kimi, were you?
It's a frustrating one because it means that we don't get any fluidity in the driver market, and what it also means is that one of the 6 best seats in Formula One have been given to somebody that we know is happy playing second fiddle and being used as cannon fodder. And I think it's a shame for Kimi because he's capable of so much more, and it also shows a lack of just imagination from Ferrari to say, and it doesn't have to be a rookie,
we see
but
so many new drivers, so much new talent coming through.
Well, that's the thing,
and
isn't it?
as Will says, there isn't then the domino effect. We can't get excited about.
And we've been saying this for the
transfers.
last couple of years, haven't we? Because the same thing's happened. It's hinged around Kimi staying or going. He stayed. It sort of flattens everything else. There are some great drivers coming through, but Ferrari have traditionally been very reluctant to ever put a rookie or a youngster without enough experience. So I think it's fairly clear what they're looking to do is to get Charles Leclerc with some experience, possibly at Sauber, with a view to, in a year's time, taking that Kimi seat and putting him in there. But I think whoever you put in is probably going to have to play second fiddle to Sebastian Vettel. And,
you know, are we missing the point? Isn't it all about Seb? Isn't it all about Seb wanting Kimi? You hang on to Kimi, you hang on to Seb.
Yes. And the fact it's only, I think, a one-year deal for Kimi is quite telling. But, you know, Ferrari have said it's all about the constructors. For us, it's always about the constructors, and we let our drivers fight. I don't believe that. But if it is all about the constructors, then you need somebody who's going to come home and bring it home just behind their lead guy. But I don't think Kimi does that. You know,
not consistently enough.
Ferrari haven't had enough 1-2s this year for that argument to hold water. So yeah, just disappointing. I mean, even
if a toe enough? Is a toe in quali enough?
Yeah, but I mean, even if they brought in a Perez or a Grosjean or someone like that, I'm not saying bring Leclerc in straight away, even though I think he could do a bang-up job. There's now no, you know, it's just a lack of fluidity in the market, which is frustrating.
Well, Pascal Wehrlein made no secret of the fact at the weekend that he believes he's out next year. He doesn't believe he's going to be a Sauber driver next year. So it looks like with their Ferrari engine deal, it will be Leclerc going into Sauber. So at least he can be gathering experience and working his way up. Any other changes? Can you see anything else happening?
I think it's taken the sting out of it this weekend. It was all looking sort of fairly exciting, wasn't it? I think it's all been shut down to a certain extent. There's obviously still the Renault seat, which is probably the next biggest seat available, and there are options. There's obviously Kubica. I don't think that's going to happen now, but the test obviously ignited that fire and passion in everybody.
So what can you see happening there?
Well, I think possibly a Perez, possibly a Carlos Sainz. I'd love to see Carlos Sainz in that car, actually, just to see what he can do up against Hulkenberg would be great. Yeah.
And Toro Rosso, who would replace him at the...
Well,
I hope for Gasly.
Yeah, exactly.
Really
Red Bull have got a
Gasly.
long list of people. I think Gasly's probably next on that list. It'd be nice to see him in the car.
I mean, this is it. We've got 2 flashpoints now. One is Fernando, one is Renault. Whatever happens with those seats, I think that controls the driver market now. That's really it, and it's limited. And who do you bring through from junior formulas? Again, as you said, Gasly and the Toro Rosso. Short of that, it's got to be Leclerc. I can't see anybody else smashing through at the moment. There's just not the...
Not quite. They're all on the cusp, but probably not quite ready.
Not quite ready.
Okay. We touched on a few of the next generation. So we've got Leclerc, Norris, Gasly, Verstappen, Sainz, Van Dorn, Ocon, Rowland and Russell. Just how excited are you both
amazing.
about the future of F1? I mean, albeit that these big seats are being closed down this year and next year, but the future looks bright.
Look, if that was your grid or half of your grid for the next in the next 2 or 3 years, that's a pretty exciting prospect, isn't it?
It's really mega. So yeah, hugely excited. So many of the people you've just mentioned have already got an F1 relationship or a young driver program thing going on. So yeah, it's hugely exciting. Can't wait to see how it all rolls out. And if we're excited now about Hamilton versus Vettel, these are our Hamilton and Vettels for the next 10 years, the likes of the Norrises, the Ocons, the Verstappens, the Leclercs, who is, and I don't say this lightly because, I've covered it for over a decade and everything, but probably the most exciting thing I've seen at that level, even, on a Hamilton level, maybe even...
Lando Norris?
Lando is exceptional, and you don't win as many championships as he does every single year without being very
to see
special.
Those two up against each other.
Oh yeah.
And trust me, Will excited. It's just
I don't get excited often, do I?
No, of course you don't. So we've got time for this week. My thanks to Will and Marc. Join us again in a few days' time as we reflect on the Italian Grand Prix. With a 2nd and 3rd place in the last 2 years, can Sebastian Vettel send the country wild with a home win in front of the loyal Tifosi? We'll have to wait and see. Bye-bye for now. Ciao.